We had the chance to check out the new Fujifilm X100V, and we actually had a few hours with it walking around the streets of London, taking photos, shooting video, and just really trying out the camera. Now, before we get into it, it's important that I mention up front that all the photos and video from the camera in this video are from a pre-production version of the camera. Now, you may already be familiar with the previous models, including things like the X100F. It's actually a really popular series of camera, and this is actually the 5th generation of X100 camera. And Fujifilm have actually updated quite a bit over the predecessors with a lot of improvements I know people have been asking for. One of those is an upgraded lens. Now, the previous lens was great, but it was really starting to show its age a little bit. But with the X100V, Fujifilm have gone for a new Mark II version of the lens. It's a fixed 23mm f2 lens, which gives you a 35mm equivalent focal length. Perfect for an all-rounder everyday system, great for street photography, great for landscape, and it's fast enough to get a bit of a blurred background in there and help out with low light photography. Now, the lens itself has 8 elements in 6 groups, including 2 spherical elements, and it's much sharper than its predecessor, both in the center and out at the edges and the corners. And I have to say, using this lens over about 4 hours, it's easy to see the differences. The sharpness is definitely improved, and it shows in the photos. Now, there are some big improvements in the design of the camera as well, but for now we're just going to stick with image quality for a moment. So you've got a 26 megapixel sensor in the camera. It's the latest X-Trans COMS 4 sensor, and with the X processor 4 in there as well. And that means you've got a really decent resolution to play with, and actually allows you a little bit of room to crop in post if that's something you want to do. You've also got an HDR mode in the camera, so you can capture a much wider dynamic range. And in terms of continuous shooting, it can shoot at 11 frames a second, which is actually really quite fast. It's faster than I thought it was going to be. It's probably faster than it needs to be, but that's part of that new processor. It makes the camera super quick, and that's definitely reflected in its shooting speed as well. It's also reflected in the autofocus, which comes in at 0.02 seconds, and it really does feel nice and snappy when you're shooting. I took a lot of photos and I didn't once miss focus, so it certainly performs well. It's definitely a reliable system. Now, I mentioned before about the low light capabilities as well. That f2 lens is going to be allowing in quite a lot of light, but something that I really liked was shooting with a slightly higher ISO number actually resulted in a really clean image. So 2500, 3200 ISO, nice and clean image. I wasn't getting noise, I wasn't getting any kind of issues at all. And that's something that I wasn't really expecting. And it's very, very nice to have that available to you in the camera. It gives you a much more versatile way of shooting, especially whether you're out later in the evening doing street photography and things like that. That's a great way to be able to shoot. Now, you've also got a nice array of film simulation modes in the camera. This is actually one of my favorite things about shooting with Fujifilm. It can give you so many creative ways to use the camera. And certainly here, modes like A-Cross and the newer classic neg from the X Pro 3 look great. In fact, that classic neg is one of my favorite of all the Fujifilm film simulation modes. Now, there is of course the Eterna Cinema film simulation mode as well, which is fantastic for video. And this camera actually holds up really well when it comes to video. I was expecting it to not have much in the way of video capabilities, but it'll actually shoot 4K at 30 frames a second, full HD at up to 120 frames a second for a bit of slow motion. And while that's all pretty standard these days, it's nice to see it included here in the camera. It's also worth noting that it's 4K without any crop. And while we're talking about it, it's also worth noting it can output 422 10-bit via HDMI or 420 8-bit internal. Now let's talk about the design and the build of the camera, because this is an area that is actually really interesting. So the actual design of the X100V is more of an angular design compared with something like the rounded design of the X100F. It's nice and sleek, but it still maintains that Fujifilm look. Now, to hold the camera, it's actually really solid in the hands with a nice feel to it. It's still a nice, compact, lightweight camera, but it has that kind of weight to it that makes it feel good quality. And one of the super exciting things about this camera is the 3-inch tilt LCD touchscreen, which tilts all the way out, making it easy to take some discreet street photography shots. I know this is something a lot of people have been asking for, and it's great that Fujifilm have listened. It's also a higher resolution at 1.62 million dots, making it higher res than on the X100F, for example. And of course, it's a touchscreen, making choosing a focus point and adjusting various controls a breeze. That's not all though, it also has a bigger, brighter hybrid viewfinder, and it's fantastic. It's similar to the viewfinder on the X Pro 3 with that hybrid optical and electronic viewfinder and the ability to switch back and forth. It offers a lot of versatility when you're composing your shots. Now the EVF part has had a decent upgrade to the resolution and is now 3.69 million dots, and I have to say it looks great. I love shooting with a film simulation mode like Classic Neg or Acros, and shooting with the EVF so you can actually see what it looks like. Otherwise, the camera has a sleek design. There's minimal buttons on the back of the camera, and there's a pull up and lock ISO control on the top, which works kind of in tandem with the shutter control. And it means that you have individual controls for everything if you're shooting in full manual, which is great. Now the weather resistance is a little bit more of a difficult subject. It is weather resistant, and if you're using it with something... Now weather resistance is a little bit more of a difficult subject. It is weather resistant if you're using it with something like the AR X100 adapter ring or the Protect filter. And that's because the lens has an external focusing mechanism, which means you need something on there to protect it. But with that on, it is weather resistant, and that makes it a really useful thing to have if you're out and about and it starts raining or something like that. There's a lot to like about the X100V. It doesn't feel like a pointless upgrade at all. There's a lot of substantial and decent upgrades, bringing this camera up to date and making it feel fantastic. I'll pop a link to the camera down in the description so you can go and check it out for yourselves. But absolutely pop any questions or thoughts you might have down in the comments. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're new. I will of course see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.